Hello, I'm Jerry Scheibach, pastor at the Lighthouse near Rainbow Sewer. Hosea chapter 8, verse 4, the Bible says, "They have set up kings, but not by me. They have made princes, and I knew it not. Of their silver and their gold have they made them idols, that they may be cut off." God's complaint against Israel was that they had set up kings or appointed rulers or put in place rulers, but did it contrary to his instructions. And I believe that's the case in America today. Now we're looking at the debate, the first presidential debate between Hillary and Trump. USA Today has decided to break something like 134-year tradition, and they decided to endorse a candidate. Actually, I guess you would say they decided to put out an anti-endorsement, and they decided that Trump would be the candidate who is most unfit to hold the office of the presidency. And they came to that conclusion, comparing him to Hillary Clinton. Imagine that. Now, USA Today is not the only news organization that has broken from its tradition in this regard. For the same article, we read this, quote, "On Tuesday, the Arizona Republic editorial board endorsed Clinton, marking the first time it had backed a Democrat for president in its 126-year history." Wow. And then this, the Dallas Morning News, the Cincinnati Enquirer, the Houston Chronicle, all, according to this article, with traditionally conservative editorial pages, have also backed Clinton. Wow. The Enquirer has supported the Republicans for president for nearly a century, and yet it broke tradition and went with Clinton. The Morning News hadn't backed a Democrat for the White House since before World War II. And then on Thursday, the Detroit News abandoned Republicans for the first time in 143 years by endorsing the Libertarian candidate, Gary Johnson. And according to this article, Johnson, who didn't even qualify for the general election debates, has actually collected more newspaper endorsements than Trump. Now, for many of us conservatives, that really isn't saying a whole lot. But it is interesting how many of these magazines have rallied now to what they consider to be a very serious situation and a very serious time in America. And the choice of president in this coming up election certainly is probably a turning point in American history. However, with all that, at least in one poll, the LA Times poll, Trump has pulled even farther ahead after the debate. The LA poll has Trump up by 6 points or so, and yet then more recently, Clinton has pulled back ahead in most of the other polls. So in balance, I think they're telling us that Clinton is ahead by something like 5 points. But that is pretty much a statistical dead heat. So we need to talk about the debate. And the first thing that we want to notice is that it was the most listened to debate in the history of televised presidential debates. 80 million viewers, and I believe that's actually more than that, 80 million plus. And the second thing we want to notice is that it was disappointing to any of us who were looking forward to some kind of a dramatic show, a Trumper tantrum perhaps, or a Hillary meltdown, or something of that nature. Both of them remained relatively calm throughout the debate. And the third thing we notice is that there were some pretty good questions that were presented during the debate, although they had your token nonsense about going back to the birther question and all that stuff too. But they did talk about the economy. And I think that the differing views between Trump and Hillary on the economy were worthy of notice. Both of them have problems, but I think Trump's plan obviously is a whole lot better for the future of the country in terms of its economy. And then trade, some issues about trade came up, and then, of course, the issue of security. And I think most of us conservatives would be much more in favor of Trump's approach to those questions than we are to Hillary's approach. And then, by way of a general observation, I would say Trump spoke more to the issues that are of substance in the main than did Hillary. And also, while Trump certainly shot some jabs to the jaw with comments critical of Hillary, it did seem to me that most of his shots were within the purview of the question that was being asked, or at least with regard to substantial issues of concern to us. Whereas Hillary wanted to drag up, did the mudslinging thing and all that, but who's surprised? For example, Hillary brings up this business about Trump doesn't talk nice about women. Actually he doesn't. And he calls girls names, stuff like that. And he stiffed some people that worked for him some time back, and all that. And he was charged with racial profiling when renting some apartments or something or other in New York a while back or somewhere, I forget where. The mudslinging things that go on in these candidacies. I thought he answered them adequately. When you're listening to Trump, he has a tendency to ramble a little bit, and he has a tendency to kind of start and stop in his sentences, and sometimes his comments are disjointed and so on. So it's a little hard to follow him sometimes. But I think if you listen closely, he answered the questions relatively well. I think he neutralized most of her attacks. Trump basically targeted his attacks on the more substantive issues, as I brought out earlier. And I thought he did a fair job. Cruz, who's a champion debater, said that he felt like Trump did the best debate job that he'd done up until then, if that's any kind of recommendation. Of course, you are dealing with Trump, and you've got to watch the debate really to follow it, because Trump's the kind of guy, if you read a transcript of what he said, it's almost impossible to follow it. But if you watch him, then you can kind of get a sense of what he's communicating and all that. In any event, the truth is, Trump's manner of presentation is actually a little more human, I think. And I believe that's something that attracts people. He doesn't come across as an automaton. He doesn't come across as a scripted, speaker or politician. Those whose ear has become weary of political speak are more comfortable with Trump because they feel like he comes across as more real. And I prefer someone that speaks with a little more clarity, but whatever. It seems to be working for him. Okay, he's gotten him this far. Anyway, I don't think it's going to hurt him, at least not this time around. As I analyze the first debate, here's what I see. First, on substance, Hillary shows that she's a socialist. I actually might go a step farther and say she reveals in this debate that she's a full-blown communist. Hillary wants to make our economy fairer. And this, she said, starts with raising the national minimum wage and by guaranteeing, finally, equal pay for women's work. Let me ask you a few simple questions. We could go deep into this kind of a subject. We could talk about Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, which really was kind of the foundational economic principles upon which this economy, this country was built. Or we could talk about Keynesian economics or the more modern versions of socialist economics, people like Kenneth Arrow and his idea of economic equilibrium. Or we could talk about who was that, Gary Becker. He's the guy that introduced the idea of economics driven by sociological factors. We could talk about, Bergman, who wants to establish an economy on a feminist model or feminist-based economy. I know it's more complicated than that, but that's the gist of it, in my opinion. And you got Alan Greenspan, who's a name everybody knows, with his fascination with manipulating the economy by controlling interest rates and all that. But I don't have the kind of time it would take to do a course in economics here. So let me just ask you a simple question. Hillary wants a fairer economy, right? Now, how many times have you told your kid, as I have told mine so often, listen, Zach, whoever said that life is fair, right? I mean, life is not necessarily fair. And I think most of us get that in the real world. But these politicians want to kind of pursue something unrealistic, and for example, as trying to make everything fair. Of course, many have confused the idea of fairness with justice these days. But these are not the same things. You have to listen close to them talk about fairness and justice to see or to discern that they are confusing these concepts. Essentially, it comes down to this. Trying to enforce fairness necessarily involves encouraging resentment, and shame, and a kind of self-reproach or self-loathing even, simply for having certain advantages that are yours by nature, perhaps, or by your stature in community or in society or whatever. And sometimes even for having advantages that you have worked hard to develop, that you have earned, that you have obtained by hard work, either by your own hard work or the hard work of family or something like that. Justice, on the other hand, protects the rights of all persons, whether or not they enjoy this or that natural or earned advantage. So progressive ideas of fairness involve attempting to even out the disadvantages of those who are not as, shall we say, advantageously naturally endowed, or whose family pedigree perhaps didn't pass on to them certain advantages that they either earned or obtained by taking advantage of their natural or earned. You understand what I'm trying to say? Sometimes people have advantages in life simply because of God-endowed skills, talents, abilities, or whatever. And everybody has their own set. And some people have advantages in one area who don't have advantages in another. Don't put me up against Shaq O'Neal in a basketball one-on-one match. That would be rather ludicrous, wouldn't it? And yet, maybe in another area, I could go toe-to-toe with Shaq in some other thing, other area of talent and so on. You get the idea. Bottom line is this. In Hillary's world, they believe that those who have this world's goods have an unfair advantage over those who do not have them simply by virtue of having them. But that is not the business of government. And in fact, listen, this is a very important point. It is impossible for government to interfere with this operation in nature, where time and chance happeneth unto us all, where one has this or that God-endowed ability and so on. When government enters into that area, they can't do it without violating justice. In other words, in the name of fairness, they destroy justice. Trump's view is summarized in his statement, for example, that we should pay women equal pay for equal work. Now, everyone with good sense can get their head around that. And yet some might consider that to be unfair, since in many venues, women are at a distinct disadvantage in certain natural endowments. Now, in other areas, they have advantages. But in many areas in the work world, they have disadvantages. For example, most women don't have the ability to work as hard and as long as a man does in many occupations. Probably, frankly, in most of them, I think that would be true. There are exceptions, of course. There are exceptionally women. There are women who have exceptional stamina and strength and all that, and then there are men who are exceptionally weak and all that. There are always exceptions, but generally speaking, there are these differences in the genders, okay, that equip one gender for certain kinds of tasks with greater advantages than another one. That's just a normal thing. But that's not good enough for communists like Hillary. They want equal pay based on gender. In other words, if a man gets X dollars for a job, then a woman should get X dollars for a job. Well, I think we can all get our head around the truth or the idea that equal pay for equal work, but not even the same pay for two men. It depends on which man's producing more. I mean, this is just crazy. So anyway, on the economy, Trump wins. His view is, you see, just. It's based on justice. Whereas Hillary's view is based on really a principle that serves ultimately to destroy justice. Her idea is to enforce, for example, she said she wants to encourage or she wants to enforce profit sharing. I hope you heard the communism under that statement. Now, by the way, I'm all for profit sharing. That's fine, but listen to what she said. She said, if you help create profits, you should be able to share in them, not just the executives at the top. Well, that's all fine and good, but what business is that of hers? That's the business of the business owner and the people who decide to work for him or not to work for him or for her. Okay? I'm all for profit-sharing companies. I think actually it's a good idea, a good model in many cases. But profit-sharing companies can't profit share unless they're also going to distribute the liability. In other words, if the employees are going to share the profits, beyond their salaries. And there's a sense in which, of course, every time an employee draws a paycheck, they are taking their share of the profit of that company, in a sense. All right? I mean, that's their participation, and that's their reward. They hired their labor out for a wage, and they received the wage. They've been paid for their labor. And so, in any event, to be just, the owner of a business, if he's going to be compelled to share his profits, must then also be allowed to share the liabilities and to share all the costs and everything else that's involved in the whole thing. So if a company goes under, for example, then it's not only the owner of the company who's on the hook and takes the hit, but all of the employees are on the hook and take the hit. And in a way, it's already like that, isn't it? If an employer loses his business, then all the employees lose their job. There's already an interrelationship between employee-employer where they're sharing with one another in an interest in making the business work and all that kind of stuff. But we're getting a little farther off into business and economics and all that than I really want to go right now. I just want to point out that Hillary is pursuing a model of fairness. And a model of fairness necessarily leads to the destruction and the dismantling of justice. That's what it does. Besides all that, shouldn't the business owner have the right to decide if he or she wants to organize their business in a profit-sharing scheme? I mean, has anybody thought about this? Does anybody else besides me agree that a business owner does have some rights? Right? I mean, doesn't the business owner have some rights? Why are we, so many of us, encouraged to be angry at the business owner and to look at the business owner as a bad guy and riding and building his success on the backs of somebody else? This is just a bunch of nonsense. It's communism. That's the point I'm trying to bring out. That's Karl Marx all over again. Isn't it true that a businessman who has risked his capital and usually who works twice the number of hours as any one of his employees, right, who's carrying the weight and the load and the burden of all the liabilities and concerns, meeting payroll, doing all that, doesn't he in fact have some rights and has earned some privileges with those rights? Oh, come on. Of course. Anyway, we can enforce justice, but we cannot enforce fairness. The only way to enforce fairness is to destroy justice. Now, on guns, let's talk about that for a minute. Hillary blames the guns, typical liberal mantra, and Trump rightly perceives that the problem is with the perpetrators. Hillary says, quote, "The gun epidemic is the leading cause of death of young African American men, more than the next 9 causes put together." The gun epidemic? We have an epidemic of the gun? What in the world is that? What kind of talk is that? Her idea here on this idea of a gun epidemic is so wrong-headed on so many levels, it's almost hard to zero in and to know exactly where to start. And she talks about a plague of gun violence, the epidemic of guns, a gun epidemic and a plague of gun violence. That's nonsense. It's a plague of gang violence. That can make some sense. It certainly is a plague of a lack of enforcement of justice, once again. And that is exacerbated by politicians who demagogue these criminal thugs and turn them into kind of quasi-heroes, really to advance their anti-gun agenda. Trump has it right, and he said, quote, "Well, first of all, Secretary Clinton doesn't want to use a couple of words, and that's law and order. And we need law and order. If we don't have it, we're not going to have a country," end quote. And so that was right on. And he goes on to say, "The argument is that we have to take the guns away from these people that have them, and they are bad people that shouldn't have them." Again, his phrasing, you see what I mean, is awkward and kind of... But you can see here that even Trump has some work to do in clearing his head of the fog that filled it in his former days. He wasn't always the champion for Second Amendment rights that he appears to be today. Listen to him. He says this, quote, "These are felons. These are people that are bad people that shouldn't be. When you have 3,000 shootings in Chicago from January 1st, when you have 4,000 people killed in Chicago by guns from the beginning of the presidency of Barack Obama, his hometown, you have to have stop and frisk," quote unquote. He goes on to say, you need more police. You need better community relations with the police. You don't have community relations in Chicago. It's terrible. I have property there. It's terrible. What's going on in Chicago? And that's just the way he talks. All right? But my point is this. I think he gets it. But you can see, he's still got a little fog in his head. He talks about the 4,000 killed by guns. He probably meant with guns. All right? But guns aren't really even the issue. It's criminal behavior that is the issue. All right, I think he gets it, though. It's certainly better than Hillary. And as you can see, however, this Second Amendment right thing is not yet worked into his DNA. All right, we hope it will finally get there. I need to conclude. There's no question at all that USA Today has got it exactly wrong. The person, the candidate, who is the most unfit to hold the office of president is not Donald Trump, it's Hillary Clinton. I mean, Benghazi Hillary, right? Email deleting Hillary, okay? Muslim Brotherhood loving Hillary, lying Hillary, rapist enabling Hillary. Truly, she is the most unfit person ever to even run for the office of the presidency. Remember what Hosea warned us about. He said, they have set up kings, but not by me. They have made them princes, and I knew it not. You know why we're in such trouble in this country right now? Because we have forsaken the Word of God, and we have set about to set up or to elevate into high office persons of low character, not following the Word of God and using the Bible as our guide. We basically have been voting our pocketbook. So silver and gold have become our God. And that's why we're in trouble.